Well, we're here for episode 2 of Tiff Talks, where I'll be using my platform to share stories of growth, success, inspiration, healing, and hope from trailblazers in South Jersey. Today, we have with us Jesus Goyco. We call him G. He is a lot of things. First of all, he's from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. He's an Army combat veteran, 27 years married with kids. He's a pastor, a stroke survivor, and in my opinion, a comedian. And I'm so happy to have you here, G. We go way back.
Way back.
When did we meet? I must have been like 10 years old.
About 10 years old.
From Chestnut Assembly of God. You were one of the leaders there, and you and your wife helped raise me.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
we became real good friends with your mom.
Yeah.
She was like a sister to me.
Yeah, I love that. And where should we begin? Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how it was growing up for you.
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, as you said in the intro, Bed-Stuy, and Marcy Project Housing, same place where Jay-Z's from.
Oh, wow. Did you meet him before?
I knew him.
Cross paths.
Cross path. Interestingly enough, my brother and I used to get paid $0.25 to walk his aunt's dog.
Oh, yeah?
Take her out and take her to the bathroom.
That's a fun fact.
So we knew each other, but really didn't know each other. We didn't hang out. We might have played tag. We might have played stickball, stuff like that. But we never really was like friends.
Okay.
And it was a different time. It was a time where living in Marcy Projects, you really had to be mindful about your friends because those same friends could have been your enemies or frenemies, if you want to call it that. So I grew up in Marcy Projects. And again, it was a tough projects we grew up in. And I guess that's time living in the projects is what began to shape my life and lead up to the chain of events, things that occurred.
Right.
So living in projects from, I believe, around 5 years old up until about I was 14 years old.
You had siblings?
We had siblings. There was 7 of us.
Oh, wow.
Living in a project, three apartment projects on the 3rd floor, 35 Notion Avenue. Anybody that might know the address. And it wasn't the best of times. It was rough.
How was your parents growing up?
Mom and dad got divorced when I was about 7, maybe a little bit younger, maybe 6. Got divorced, and this began the chain of events that would pretty much solidify who I would be and some of the things that I would eventually endure in my life and overcome. Mom and dad got divorced, and it really took a toll on Mom, emotionally and mentally.
Yeah.
She began to suffer with manic depression. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and to calm her, the depression she was dealing with, she turned to drugs, and she became a heroin addict and a crack user.
Wow.
During those times. So it was pretty tough. It was pretty tough seeing a mom that was so dedicated, so loving, just begin to crumble.
Yeah.
And then we begin to feel the effects of it.
Right.
And at no time did I doubt that she didn't love us. And again, anyone with an addiction, which is interesting because I work at an addiction recovery center.
Oh, wow.
But it's a disease.
And it takes over, like
Yes.
it takes your soul.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that people have a hard time overcoming and really battling. And at no time did I hate her for it, but because it left us vulnerable, because she was more into the drugs, I faced abuse when I was growing up by a family member from 5 to about 7 years old.
Wow.
And my brothers and sisters really never knew this. And I think I've only told them maybe 1 or 2 of them this of what happened.
Wow.
Because, and the reason why I never said this because I didn't want to sound like one of those celebrities out there that say, this happened to me when I was a kid, because you get that story. But there was a lot of things that I undertook because I was the oldest of 7 to kind of shield them from the same harms that I dealt with, and it was experienced that was thrown upon me.
Wow.
So I took the blunt of a lot of things, and they never knew that. They never knew what I went through just to make sure they were safe. I had 4 sisters and 2 brothers. And the attention was towards them. And I stepped in. Don't touch them.
You never really told anybody or like went to therapy growing up after that happened to you?
You know what? I was about 18 years old maybe. And I was going to a church in Brooklyn. And one day I woke up from a sleep, real sweat, bed soaking wet. And I went and I spoke to my pastor at that time at the church I was attending. And I just thought it was just a bad dream. And I shared with him what happened, because it was so traumatic for me that I totally blocked it out of my mind and memory. And as I shared this with him, he began to tear. And I'm like, what are you crying for? He was like, Jesus, that's not a dream. This is something that happened to you, but you suppressed it so much that you really don't remember.
Wow.
And then through a couple of sessions, it began to come up and resurface. And then I began to get some healing from that.
Wow.
You know? And that part shaped me. I was angry.
Right.
And I guess I masked a lot of that anger and trying to be funny, being rebellious, doing the wrong thing. I guess you could have considered me at that time maybe the black sheep or looking like a black sheep, because I think I did things opposite from what people expected me to do, and opposite of what people wanted me to be. But I had all this inside of me, and I didn't know why I had this anger, or why I had certain insecurities, or why I felt afraid and didn't want to come out.
Right.
And this is how I masked it. I just put on a mask. Nobody knew about this.
So how was your young adult life, or what led you to the Army?
What led me to the Army, I always wanted to go to the Army. When I graduated from high school, or finished high school rather, I took the test, failed. And I thought, well, maybe that's not my chance. So my sister came to live with us when I was living in Newfield, New Jersey. She came to live with me for a while because her life was upside down and she wanted to do something with her life. Mm-hmm. So she decided that she wanted to go to the military. And I was like, fine, I'll go with you.
Wow.
To the recruiter station. I went with her. She didn't want to take the test by herself, so I took the test with her at the MEP station. And I wound up passing and everybody else failed.
Oh, wow. Check that out.
So the recruiter asked me, what do you want to do? And at that time, I was like, you know what, I really want to do the Army, but I'm married. I have 2 daughters. My youngest daughter had a condition called hydrocephalus, where she had brain surgery. And at that time, I was working for Progresso Food, or General Mills Company. Mm-hmm. And the benefits was good. They paid for the first surgery, but I wasn't sure if the benefits would pay for the second surgery. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, if I go into the military, everything is covered. It's free. Yeah. I got nothing to worry about. So that was one of the things that led me down the path of becoming a soldier in the United States Army.
How old were you then?
I was 27, Tiff.
Oh, wow.
27. I mean, a lot older than what most people would be when they went into the service. I think I was the oldest one.
Oh, wow.
In my company.
Takes a lot of courage.
Oh, it did.
And thank you for your service. My dad's in the Army, was in the Army, my brother. You know, I have so much respect for you guys.
Loved it. Some of the best time of my life.
Oh, wow. The camaraderie, right? Nothing like it.
Yeah.
I obviously never joined the military, but I did join a sorority. So I got that feeling of, you know, we went through the trenches together, you know. But and you served in Iraq too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Served there for a year.
How was that?
It was interesting. I loved it.
Really?
You know, some people might look at me like I'm crazy, might see this and say, what are you talking about? When we were inside our camps in our little safe haven, it was fun. It was like just being back home. Outside of the battles that we were in, but in the battles we were in, there were many ambushes that I was caught in, a lot of IED explosions.
Wow.
And sabotages and stuff that I was involved in, but walked away unscathed, unhurt, uninjured.
Were you scared? Or were you like numb to it?
No, I was excited because my adrenaline was rushing.
Right.
So I think I was more excited to
see that action.
Yeah, to see the action. You know, it was not until after we went back to camp and we settled in and we just unwind that when I lay down in my cot, or in my bed rather, that and the adrenaline rush kind of wore off, it felt like I got lost in my bed. And it was like, I can't believe that I'm alive. We just got ambushed. Or
wow.
A quick story. I was driving a truck. In the truck, we're going down the road in a convoy exercise. So they pulled us over and they asked us to stop. And in the area where we were at, I'm like, well, why are you stopping us? You know, this is a hostile area. Mm-hmm. But they wanted us to stop because the truck I was driving, there was an explosion that occurred. So they wanted to make sure that we was okay. Mm-hmm. Thank God we were. So the commander comes out and said, hey, did you experience that? Did you see that? And he was like, what, your truck blew up? And I looked at my truck and I was like, what are you talking about? He said, your truck blew up. And something happened to the truck. I'm pretty sure that it was either an IED or one of the locals got on to the camp because some of the Iraqi local nationals would work, because not all were bad.
Right.
Some of us was for us, but and understood that we were there to free them, because the operation was called Operation Iraqi Freedom, and then eventually they changed the name to Enduring Freedom. But you had insurgents that would come in posing as one of the
workers. Yeah,
like they were for us. So either somebody sabotaged the truck, or it was a roadside bomb that I drove over, and I was driving a 915th, which is pretty much a freight line, an 18-wheeler that had 5,000 gallons of fuel in it. When I went over the ID, or whether they sabotaged it or ID.
Oh my gosh! And it didn't blow up.
Didn't blow up.
That's insane.
So when they asked us to get out the truck, I looked, and I was like, nothing's wrong with the truck. And they was like, we don't get it. We don't understand it. And I was like, well, I know who
God has a plan for you.
I'm a faith person. And I was like, well, I know who I serve.
It wasn't your time.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was one of my favorite verses during chapters in the Bible at that time is Psalms 91. If you grew up as a Christian or a believer, I think everybody had a Bible opened up in their home to maybe that verse, Psalms 91, and it talks about safety and a blessing during troubled times, persecution. It's pretty much of a blessing. And I used to tag up
that carried you through.
Yeah, and I used to tag up all the vehicles in Psalms 91.
Oh yeah,
not the whole chapter. I just used to write Psalms 91.
Nice.
And that's what kept me safe.
Wow.
I believed and I lived that scripture and that whole chapter out, and believed that 100 is going to fall on one side and 1,000 is going to fall on the other side. And that's what carried me through.
Wow.
And it was a testimony to them where my faith was, because they've seen miracles. And I mean, we can be here for hours. There's stories that I can talk about where if someone didn't believe in a higher power, or someone didn't believe that there was a God, just being around me and some of the things that they experienced, it made them a believer.
That's amazing.
And every time we went out on any type of mission, the first question they would ask is, hey, is Goyco going out with us?
Oh, then we safe.
Yeah. And there was times that I did 2 or 3 tours. So our tour was 4 hours on, 8 hours off, because it was so hot in the desert. And I would do a couple of tours because some of the guys felt safe because I was there.
Wow. That's powerful. And when did you become a Christian? When did you get such strong faith after such a hard, childhood?
I wouldn't say I was a Christian, because, people go to church every day, and I don't think they really was
live it.
Yeah, and they're not really dedicated. Let me leave this Bible alone. They're not really dedicated. I guess they go through the motion, which is understandable, because people still trying to find themselves as far as in this walk. But when you make that decision and you begin to live it out, and it shows, and I think that's when you can really say that I'm a follower. Mm-hmm. So in my 20s, well, I was always in church, grew up in church, in and out, but it was because of circumstances, shifting from mom to dad and back to mom and dad. And when I lived with dad, that's when I really was immersed into Christianity. But it wasn't until I met my wife when I was 20, I'm going to say 20, I believe it was 20, where on my birthday, September 24th, when I actually said, you know what, I'm going to do this thing for real. It's about 27 years now.
Wow.
Really living this thing out.
Nice.
Yeah.
So after the Army, you became a pastor.
Became a pastor.
What led you there? How was that journey?
Well, I came out, ETS'd, and got an honorable discharge, 3 of them, because you re-enlist. So I got 3 of them, and then when you come out, you're on inactive, ready reserve. And I couldn't find a job at the time, but I wasn't too worried about it. I went on a missions trip to Mexico with Chestnut Assembly.
Did we go together?
We went together.
2016?
2007, I think.
16, that's way later.
2007.
Yeah, with Isaiah Cotto and Pastor Ralph.
Armor shirts.
That was my first mission trip, my only mission trip. That was so nice.
Yeah, we went together, armor shirts, remember?
Yeah. Wow.
So it was on that trip that I went, and I wouldn't say that's when I felt that I was going to be a pastor, because I didn't want to be a pastor. And the reason why I didn't want to become a pastor was because Dad he wasn't a pastor, but he was one of the ministers in the church. Mm-hmm. And I saw how Dad would give his all.
Dad?
My father.
Oh, yeah?
That he would give his all and serve and serve. And to me, growing up, I felt like people really didn't appreciate him, appreciate the things he did. And my dad was so humble, and it didn't bother him. It was not a concern that people appreciate or not. He said, my reward is in heaven. But to me, from the outside looking in, I would always say to Dad, I'll never become a pastor. People don't appreciate you. You do this, you do that. You give an arm and a leg, and it's like nothing. Wow. I'll go on a Mexico trip, and I'm in the group with the current pastor right now, Chestnut Assembly, Pastor Tony. I'm in this group. He was supposed to go preach at one of the churches. He didn't want to preach. He was too nervous to preach. So he asked me if I would preach because he heard that I used to preach. And I told him, I said, bro, that was before I went to the Army. I said, Dad, you talking about 8 years ago. I haven't stood on a platform, haven't preached a sermon. But nevertheless, I did it anyway. And that's when God began to open up the doors, and that hunger for me to minister again and just share his word began to bubble up inside. I come back from that. I took a test for law enforcement, all of them, for state troopers, county sheriffs, and violent PD. Passed them all. And then with the veteran preference status, you get that extra 5-10 points. Mm-hmm. Never heard back from them. So I get involved in the ministry team Master's Commission.
Yep. I
get involved in Master's Commission. I get on the team. I do the whole 9-month program with them. I graduate. And it's during this time in Master's Commission, we would take our trips back and forth to area churches or outside of the state. Mm-hmm. I went to the Bronx, and I ministered at 3 churches that we were invited to. And it was at one of the churches that eventually I wound up becoming their youth pastor for 12 years. That they were looking for a youth pastor, and the pastor had his eyes on me, because he said as soon as I walked in, all the youth just gravitated to me. I think they gravitated to me because, number one, You're
hilarious, and your energy is big and infectious. Everybody loves G. And
then the thing is, I went in and I was like one of them. And what I mean by that is, I understood them. Mm-hmm. I knew where they were coming from because I grew up in New York. I grew up in the hood, and a lot of them was facing a lot of hardships.
Yeah.
And dealing with some stuff.
And probably didn't know how to talk about it.
And I came in and I was able to relate with them. And I think that's what drew them to me, because they was like, he's like one of us. And we leave. So when we leave on the way home, the director, his name is Tim DeZinzio, he said, hey, they want you to become their youth pastor. You should put your application in. And I looked at him and said, I'm not doing nothing. I told you I don't want to be a pastor. Because I was still bitter from that experience that Dad went through. I'll preach.
Yeah.
I'll preach. I'll do anything else but a pastor. And upon graduation, I still haven't submitted my resume. And then the director tells me again, hey, they're waiting for you to put your resume in. I didn't hear back from the exam that I took with law enforcement. So I said, you know what? I said, just to get them off my back, I put my resume in. Went in, they called me for an interview. I went. They called me back that Monday, and they said, hey, we want to know if you want to be our youth pastor. And all this was based upon a prayer that I did in the desert. Because when I was in the desert in Iraq, I got so tired of the battle. It came a time and a point where I got so tired, and I really didn't want to be there anymore. And in a battle, in a gunfight, I just got down on my hands and knees. And you're not supposed to abandon your post, but I did. And I just cried out and I said, God, I don't want to be here no more. I'm tired of this God-forsaken place. If you take me out of here, I'll do anything you want me to do. And I forgot about that prayer.
He said, oh, yeah?
I forgot about that prayer. So when I came back and I graduated from Master's Commission, Pastor Ralph called me into the office. And he was like, hey, you know the Galenas? And I was like, yes. He said, well, there's a sister church that they're pastoring in Mays Landing. And I was like, okay. He was like, they need a youth pastor. What you want to do? He said, I heard some great things about you. And I want to know if you're willing to go help them with their youth. They got youth, but they don't have no youth ministry, and help develop something. And at this point, sitting in his office, I was ready to say, no, I'm not being a pastor. But I heard a clear voice. I'm not going to say audible, but I heard it within me.
In your heart, yeah.
Right? Tapping on my shoulder saying, what are you going to do now? Or are you going to run like you did last time? Oh, and that was the other reason why I went into the Army. I knew he was calling me to ministry, and I didn't want to do it, so I went to the Army. So I heard that voice that said, what are you going to do now? Are you going to run again like the first time, or are you going to honor your prayer that you said in the desert?
Wow.
And what I didn't tell you was, after I said that prayer in the desert, I get a Red Cross message that Jasada, you know, my youngest daughter, that she had a brain tumor. She was maybe 4 or 5, and she might not make it. She was going to get surgery.
Wow.
So they sent the Red Cross message. They pulled me out of Iraq. 2 days later, I was back in Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I did that stint with them, I was part-time there. I did that for about 1.5 years, and then that's when that position that I'd applied for in the Bronx opened up after I submitted my resume. And I remember what he said, what are you going to do now? And I said, you know what? I made a promise. I'm going to stick to it. If I give you my word, I'm going to keep it. And right after I said yes, this was on a weekend, so on a Monday, I get this call, and I said, okay, I'll accept the position. I'll be your youth pastor. I believe it was Wednesday morning. I'm walking to the mailbox. Open up the mailbox, and guess what's in the mailbox? My date for the academy.
Oh, wow.
To report to the academy. So I'm looking at this, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
Oh, man.
I was like,
what are you going to do now?
Yeah, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, I looked up, and I was like, are you kidding me? Why this couldn't have come 2 days earlier?
Right.
You know? Why? Again,
it's a test.
I heard a voice in my spirit again saying, I did this because I wanted you to know that you didn't have to settle. You could have made any decision you wanted. But I wanted to see if he was going to honor your word this time. And I showed it to my wife. She was like, what you going to do? I said, the money's good. We can use the money. because we was in a financial bind at the time. But I said yes to God, so I'm going to just trust him.
Wow.
And that led us on a path down to the Bronx. There 12 years, started as a youth pastor. Then eventually, after 7 years being there, we became the campus pastors at a sister church that we was helping out. And then from there, we eventually wound up becoming the lead pastors there.
Wow.
So a whole 13 years. And let me tell you how God is. In the Assemblies of God, you can't pastor a church if you don't have credentials. You can be a youth pastor, without credentials, but you can't pastor a church without credentials. But I did.
Ooh.
He opened up that door.
Wow.
He allowed me to pastor a church without credentials. I was pastoring the church without credentials, and it's during that time while I was pastoring the church that I eventually gained my credentials. Mm-hmm. So there were certain things certain doors that
lined you up.
Yeah, he opened up certain doors.
That's amazing.
And the journey's been a good one. It's been a good one.
And then you came back to Jersey, and you were living in a not so favorable apartment for a couple years. Yep. And then you hit me up.
Yep.
And we got you a house. And that was a beautiful story on its own. We won't have to get into that, but
I was like, Tiff, we got to do something.
G came to call me. He came to my office. We got you approved that day. We went out the next day to go see houses, put an offer in, got accepted, and we closed like 28 days later. Yeah. And that was it. And you got a beautiful house now. I'm so happy for you guys. And now your wife has a nice area where she can bake her amazing goods, which I love so much.
Yeah, shameless plugs. Ate Amaze Delight.
Yes, so good, so good. But and then tell us about how you experienced a stroke so young. And I feel like no matter what happens to you, you still have this attitude of you're happy and you're grateful, and your faith never falls for God, and you just keep on persevering, and I love that.
Well, one thing that I've learned throughout my life, and I've been through a lot of ups and downs, more downs than ups, but at this point in my life, I'm seeing a lot of ups, and I thank him for it. But during all those experiences, I've learned that you can't control what's not controllable. Mm-hmm. Things are going to happen. Right. And it makes no sense for you to be upset and be bitter about the things the events that you can't control. Right. So I had the stroke, and that's one of the reasons why we're back here in Vineland, because the stroke pulled me away from the church that we were pastoring.
So that happened, 2019?
2019, St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, wow.
And I had the stroke.
So young, too. What, like 43?
I was 47.
47?
Believe. I'm 50 now, so I was 47. And I was in the best shape of my life. I was training in the gym every day, almost 6 days a week sometimes. Mm-hmm. And we went to Miami, come back from Miami. I didn't notice anything. I just felt tired, unusually tired, but I'm not a bad flyer. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was just jet lag. And that was a Saturday. We came back Sunday, went to church, preached the message, the whole thing, went home, took a nap, got up, couldn't walk.
Wow.
Had a massive stroke. I get to the hospital. The doctors and the nurses all come in, and it was like, how you doing? And I said, I'm fine. They started asking me questions because they really wanted to check my memory, how I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I got to the point, and I was like, well, how you keep asking me things about this? Oh, this is common when you have a stroke to find out where your memory is at.
You. Right.
I said, yes, but this is overly excessive. And that's when they began to tell me. They said, well, the reason why we're asking you is because half of your right side of your brain is gone. Pretty much most of it is gone. But your stroke happened in your memory area. And we're just finding it odd that you still remember certain things.
Wow.
When it happened in your dominant side of your memory, because the brain has two sides that contains the memory, but one side is always dominant. Mine's happened to be the right side. And they was just puzzled. And so they asked me a lot of questions. But during that whole ordeal, I guess you call it, they said I would never walk again. It's going to take a long time before I can even talk again or even move.
Wow.
But let me tell you something.
And now look at you.
I was so determined and so focused because they said, I'm not going to do this. And I'm like, you don't even know who you're talking to. I've heard that my whole life.
Right.
Yes. I've heard that my whole life, and I've overcome adversity throughout my whole life. I'm not going to let this keep me down. They walked into the room the next day, and I was working out.
Oh,
Couldn't
wow.
move. But the
What
part
was you
the part that was working, I was working out. They gave me these bands, resistance bands, and I tied them up to the rails,
Okay.
and I was working out.
Wow.
And they found me planking on my bed. And they was like, bro, what are you doing? You can't be doing this. You just had a stroke. I was like, do you know who you're talking to?
Right.
I said, my name is Jesus. No pun intended, but I said, my name is Jesus. I was like, I didn't get this name for a reason.
Right.
I said, I got this name because it was intentional. And I was like, so you don't know who I am. And I told him, secondly, you can't tell me that I can't do nothing. Because I'm going to prove you wrong. That's why I got into a lot of trouble when I was a kid. Because I'm going to do what you tell me not to do, that I can't do. I'm going to do it. And I think that, again, the things that happen in my life is what
Give you thick skin, grit,
Yeah.
relentlessness.
it made me
Yeah.
not to quit
Never give up. Yeah.
when the
odds are against
yeah.
you.
And I just pushed through, and they said, oh, you're going to be in the hospital for about 6 months to a year because you're in bad shape. I walked out of that rehab center a month and a week later.
Wow.
Wowing the
Amazing.
whole rehab place, because it was like, there's people that came in here with a stroke less than yours, less condition, and they still here, but you had a massive stroke. Matter of fact, you had a 24-hour stroke.
Wow.
You were in bad shape, and you're walking out of here, you look better than everybody else. We wouldn't even, if you hadn't told us, we would have never guessed you had a stroke.
Wow.
You know?
Check that out. So you've been beating the odds since you were born, pretty much. I mean, you could have been a statistic. You were abused at a young age. Your mom was on drugs. Your parents were divorced, and then you even joined the army late, and you ran over a bomb, and you just like, you have 9 lives, and you never give up.
I can write a story, a movie.
And what I love most about you, G, is if you look at you, or if someone were to meet you, they would never guess all that you've been through. You have such a positive light about you, and your energy is always high, and you're always wanting to help and make people laugh. And that's really why I wanted you on the show, because I just want to, normalize and put a face to everyday heroes like yourself. And also being a soldier makes you a hero. And you're just a hero for so many people, for being a pastor, for being a dad, for being a great husband. And so I just wanted to thank you. And thank you for sharing so much intimate information about your life. I really hope that, our listeners or our audience can relate to your story, and tell them, where can we find you and what can we expect from you in the future? I know you're also a content creator and you make a lot of videos. So where can we follow you?
Well, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and it's pretty much all the same. Natareem, Nats.
Yeah. What is the story about that?
Natareem, well, that's Hebrew for branches. And that's taken out of the scripture where John and Jesus is having an interaction, and he tells his disciples, I am the vine and you are the branches. So branches in Hebrew is called Natsarim, but also watchman is Natsarim. So I just kind of gravitated to that. So I kind of call myself on some of the platforms the Natsarim.
And how do you spell it?
Natsarim, I believe.
Yeah.
Natsarim.
We'll put it in the caption.
Yes. And so on Facebook, it's just my name, Jesus Goyco. But then I have a media page where it's a separate page, is a Natsarim. On TikTok, the Natsarim, and what's the other one? Instagram, same thing. I am Natsarim.
Awesome.
And I got a podcast called Natsarim.
Nice.
Can you repeat the question again?
Oh no, that was it. It's just where we can follow you, and so
Okay.
I'll make sure that we tag your social medias, and you have a podcast now.
Okay.
And your podcast, what would you say that's about? Like,
My podcast is pretty much basically speaking on truth, because although I'm a person that grew up in a faith-based organization, if I can speak freely and honestly, I pretty much got tired of institutionalized and organized religion. And my whole thing,
that's an episode in its own.
yeah, my whole podcast that I'm really trying to work on is just really bringing truth and sharing truth on what he really came to do and what his message was really about. It wasn't about
Christ consciousness.
yes, and it wasn't really about organized or institutionalized religion, which
It has
starting to
become-
look more corporate to me than what it really was, what it really was supposed to be, meant to be. So
That's
it's
deep.
controversial,
I like that.
because my opening is you're listening to the Naturim, where I speak truth and nothing but the truth. But the question is, can you handle the truth? Because I'm gonna challenge your theology.
I like that.
You know, there might be things that you might not agree with, but because of searching and just studying and really seeking out truth and information, there's a lot of stuff that I've uncovered or become a revelation to me that I'm like, you know, there's a lot of things that we're doing that we're not supposed to be doing.
Right.
So it's real controversial.
That's deep. Thank you so much, G. It was a pleasure having you on today's Tiff Talk. And guys, tune in for the next episode.